Okay, we'll get started. Hi, I'm Jen Mamlett. This is becoming a familiar scene for all of us. I want to thank all of you for joining us once again for the call today. We have three outstanding colleagues to join us today, Peter Blair, Marcy Glazer, and Brian Schreiber, to share with us they're what we are dubbing roadmaps for JCCs, both in the near term and as we all adapt to the new normal. Hard to believe that that's the phrase that we're using, but that's the phrase that we're using. A couple quick notes about the call. I think some of this is very familiar to those who have been routinely joining us. The format is going to be similar to what we've done. You'll note that you've been muted upon entry. To manage Q&A, I will turn things over to my colleague, Sue Gelsey. There are several colleagues from JCC Association on the line. I won't take the time to introduce everybody, but Sue is on and she will handle Q&A. So if you have questions, we ask that you please send them to JCC Association. She will monitor the chat, do that through the chat. Rather than to everyone, it's just easier for her to get them directly. She will monitor, and when we turn to Q&A, she will she will take over and ask those questions. A couple things before we turn it over to the panelists. I know that the execs on the call should have received a little while ago an email from Gabe Most requesting questions to a survey. Please know that our intention is not, this is not for our use. This is so that we can help with our partners in the funding that we're pursuing, as well as those that are working on our behalf on the lobbying efforts. These are questions that continue to come up. The more data we have about the field as a collective, the better both of those efforts will be, both for lobbying and from a fundraising standpoint. So we ask if you can, I know it was a very short turnaround time. Gabe was hoping we could get that data back from you by 3:30 Eastern time today. The survey is brief. Please know that where there are questions about financial data, it is also okay for you to estimate. We're not asking you to go into your files and get us rounded to the nearest number. Just give us what you can, as close as you can. It's really about the aggregate data that we will be collecting state by state, and then obviously across the entire North America, across the continent. So please, if you can do that, I ask that you do. I am wondering, I know that Daron also wanted to take a moment. Gabe, can you confirm and nod if Daron is already joined? Perfect. Daron wanted to take a couple of minutes at the top of the call today just to share some updates on our efforts to that point about the survey. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Daron briefly.
Terrific. Thank you. Can you hear me? Just a quick nod. Everybody's
Yes.
hearing me? All right. Terrific. So first of all, thank you. I'm going to repeat something that I've heard from any number of you on these calls. It makes me feel good to see everybody. I know how difficult these days are, these hours are for everybody in the field. It somehow softens it a little bit to know that we're in this together and we're going to work our way through this together. So I'll begin by thanking you for your continued stewardship over a very difficult and dynamic crisis, one in which we're not entirely clear what's coming next, but we have to prepare nevertheless. On a continental level, I want you to be aware of several important dynamics. Number one, I want to underscore Jen's request for the very limited but very important data that we've asked. We're working intimately with the Washington Action Office of the Jewish Federations of North America on lobbying, on engagement with Congress, and on guidance and distribution for engagement with governments on a state level. So the data that you have been providing to us has allowed us to paint a sort of a global picture of the impact of the crisis on our field. But the more granular local data is being shepherded to congressional district leadership and relative state senators, and we will do the same thing in the right mechanism on the Canadian side of the border. So the data will be important, we believe far more important for you. And so we just want to make sure that your insight and information is being appropriately shared. And JFNA, to their credit, have been terrific, active, responsive, engaged, and very forthcoming, both in terms of what they are able to do and what we can do to help them to do it better. The other thing, also related, I suppose, to that, Eric Fingerhut, who is my counterpart at the Jewish Federations of North America, and I have been in extensive daily consultation about the bigger impact and the bigger considerations, not on an institution by institution level, but on the level of the infrastructure of Jewish community and Jewish communal life. We are now working together with probably the senior professionals at the 10 most significant federations and a similar number of leaders from the mega foundation world to convene a leadership discussion in the next couple of working days on how to create a pool of no interest or exceedingly low interest capital that will enable the Jewish communal landscape to rebuild and renew on the day this crisis is over. That conversation is at the level of 9 figures, and I don't think low 9 figures is going to get it done. That kind of capacity exists, and our trying to harness it with an eye on federation beneficiary agencies, principally with an eye, from my point of view, on JCCs, but also on summer camps, on day schools, on human service infrastructure. This is the broad agenda in which I want you to be aware we at the association are very centrally involved. The conveners of this gathering of leadership will be Eric Fingerhut and his chair, Mark Wilf, and me and our chair, Gary Jacobs. You know, at this stage, I would say that conversation is imminent and will take place, and then we'll see. We have some initial notions about what the modeling could look like, and we need to get those folks in the room, and we need to get them on board to getting others to join with them in creating the critical mass that's going to be needed. So I want you to be aware that in addition to the field-specific work that we continue to do at JCC Association, we are also, on your behalf, very centrally involved in the bigger strategic, critical financial needs that we're going to face together with the wider Jewish communal landscape in the weeks and months that will follow the end of this crisis, whenever the time comes. I also think, and Jen, I don't want to preempt you here, but that you should be aware that in addition to the evolving set of webinars and consultations that we are convening around you, the senior executives, there are a growing number of convenings of webinars at the professional cohort level, at every professional cohort level. And I was on a call an hour and a half or so ago with the CEOs of the independent camps, many of whom I know are on this call as well. But we are trying to be attentive both to the fact that CEOs can only be in so many places at one time, and that up and down the chain, with all of the challenges and the difficult decisions that we are all about to confront and have to carry out, the difficult decisions that will follow, the more support we can provide at the line level for our people, the better connected and involved and engaged they're going to feel. So again, my thanks to you for leading us and for providing us with so much insight, wisdom, and guidance. We learn from you every single time we have these calls. And Jen, thank you for providing me a couple of minutes.
Of course, of course. And you can always preempt me, Doron, that's okay. I just want to acknowledge that Gabe and I are certainly seeing what's in the chat. We realize that many of you have not, if not all of you, have not yet seen the survey. So Gabe is working on the back end with our IT team to make sure, and maybe even by the end of this call, we'll have an update for you. So with that, I want to turn over to the sort of topic at hand here, which, as I said at the top, was really about a roadmap for how we move forward. We have asked 3 of our great colleagues, Peter, Marcy, and Brian, to share reflections. And Marcy, I'm gonna start with you because it strikes me that it was 6 days ago. It's emotional to even say that you were on a panel that we dubbed On the Front Lines. I'm seeing Deanne in the square, and if Amy's also on the call, talking about what we might expect to see in the coming days. It's not that you had a crystal ball, but I would certainly say that what you predicted is where we are. And so we thought it was important to have you as a part of this panel because it's important to see the evolution, I think, for all of us, that each of us have either gone through, are going through, or anticipate going through. So to all of the panelists, just as a quick note, here's what we've asked them to think about in preparation for this call. They'll each have 5-10 minutes to address, and then we'll open up to Q&A. But what we're asking for is guidance about current approaches to employment issues, layoffs, furloughs, terminations, how you're addressing things with your facility, seeking new revenue sources, and also whatever considerations or deliberations and processes are in place in your communities, in your JCC leadership, as you think about the potentially long-term impact of the new normal and how we're going to deal with this for the period to come. So Marcy, I'll start with you.
Hi, everybody. It's morning here in San Francisco. I'll just jump right in. Yeah, as we closed our preschool facilities a week ago, we closed the entire building, the entire set of facilities on Friday of last week. Monday, we were in a mode where we had about 45 staff in the building winding down when our mayor's shelter-in-place order came out. We gathered at 6-foot distance in our main atrium. I addressed the staff that was there. We watched our mayor's news conference. I led the staff in the Shehechianu, and we left the building. An emotional moment for everybody, and I know almost everybody on this call has had a similar experience in shutting down. More impactful, I think, than many of us actually recognized in the moment, locking the door behind you. So with regard to employment issues, I think, and I've seen the chat on the side, keeping up with so we're on multiple tracks. One track is understanding what foregone revenue we are projecting through the end of our fiscal year, which is July 1, June 30. So we have roughly a quarter and a half. So looking at the foregone revenue, looking at our compensation costs, like most of you, I imagine we're roughly 80% compensation, and going billing by billing to understand what our approach is. And like many of you out there, we have chosen to we billed in March, and we are asking into the future for folks to consider their normal monthly billing as a contribution to keeping the JCC whole. But we will not be auto billing for April, or at this point, we're not. Our time horizon is the end of our fiscal year, with a potential June 1 resumption of some services. If it's sooner than that, great. But that's the planning horizon that we've chosen. And as I said last time, choosing your scenarios that you're going to plan for is the key importance. So we're looking at what we can do, our cash position, what the appetite for the board and the executive staff is to dip into our reserves with regard to making decisions about furloughs and the like, but with the base desire to keep as many people as whole as possible until, which leads to the second piece, which is trying to track the enormous amount of activity going on at every governmental level with regard to requirements for employers, suggestions for employers, relief for employers. And without understanding what that's going to look like, and trying to track that is its own issue. And so I'd welcome any possibility, certainly at least from the national level, assistance in sort of parsing what that means. Certainly tax relief to employers doesn't mean a lot to us, or to the enormous not-for-profit sector. So I imagine there's a lot going on there that obviously we're not focused on. With regard to facilities, we have gone to minimal staffing. I mean, I have a very gung-ho team that would love to get the work done that doesn't get done when you're open 364 days, 359 days a year, 19 and a half hours a day. But that's not practicable in our current environment in San Francisco. But we've done a little bit of work on looking at what that could be. It's both an if and when we have the ability to reopen even on a limited basis if we can be considered essential. With regard to new revenues are all about development. And so, like I'm sure everybody else on this call, I've been on the phone endlessly with regard to putting together a resilience fund. Gotten some interest, but as also folks are being deluged from every sector that they support, and that's understandable. I would say when I'm looking forward at what the new normal is, I've got my team focused on really three things. One is identifying how we can preserve revenue, and I think we've seen a tremendous burst of creativity across the sector on how to keep delivering some value to fitness customers, with the idea of maybe being able to bill some in some way. We are beginning to look at camp. We've been very successful already in our ECE world in terms of limiting refund requests, which we are not, which we said we're not refunding, but of course we are considering relief on an individual level. Second is strengthening and supporting our connections to our existing communities. I say it that way rather than our existing activities, because my activity staff has been how do you reach out to your folks even if you're not delivering aquatics lessons? And we've got phone trees on tap that we're looking to get going, so that we literally touch as many people as possible very directly in a very customized way, at least in this initial phase. Trying to keep on track an FY21 budget, which is going to have to be delivered, and working with lay leadership, our finance committee and our governance committee, as to what are our executive committee, what are the assumptions that we need to make for that FY21 budget. But I don't want to get us 6 weeks down the road and all of a sudden look around and say, oh, wait, hold on. And then, two other areas that we're just getting into. One is how we care for ourselves and for others. The grim scenarios here are an overwhelm of the healthcare system, and most people who are pretty sick but not critically sick being at home. And what does it mean to care? What does it mean to care for our own staff community? How do we assay the needs there, and what can we offer to the general public in that road? We have probably maybe a week before that really slams home, maybe. And how do you start thinking about that? And also thinking about how do we use our physical facilities. So right now we're looking at using them in a positive way. We're in an dense urban environment. So how do we light, maybe not light up, but how do we put signs in the windows? Like, how do we present a public presence from the building that offers offers hope and reassurance? And then ultimately, I'm in conversation with our local authorities. I think I may have mentioned this last week, about reopening some portion of our early childhood programming for healthcare workers and disaster service workers from the city. And I've also gotten inquiries, again, pretty grim, inquiries about using our physical space as overflow for quarantined individuals who do not have a place to go. Clearly, we're not as well organized for that as hotels, and San Francisco has a very dense hotel capacity. But city officials have reached out to me on that topic as well.
Marcy, thank you. Indeed sobering. I'm going to ask one quick follow-up question. I think it's relatively quick. I have to imagine that there's several colleagues on this call who share your fiscal calendar. JCC Association is on a calendar year fiscal, and I was challenged enough on our own just thinking about long-term impact. But for those of you that are on a June 30th, Marcy, I'm wondering, as you're anticipating a 21 budget, are you looking at a scenario where you're potentially building out 2 or 3 different budget scenarios?
Well, we already do a tier 1 and a tier 2 in terms of desires. We're now, I think, sort of shifting from the tier 1 and tier 2 is a reach that would be really positive to a tier 0, which is the baseline that's more conservative, and tier 1 essentially being where we are right now. Again, I'm trying not to get the team too focused on that, but it's really also about how do there's an opportunity here, right? Not just to strengthen our own communities, but we have the attention of the world right now. We have the attention of a lot of people in San Francisco, for example, who are now looking for content and materials that we wouldn't otherwise be providing. So I want to be sure that we are capturing that opportunity. What does that look like? You know, we're no longer at 1 to 6 preschool ratios because we have 4 teachers and all of our kids are at home. So what happens when we produce virtual Jewish preschool for all of San Francisco? We don't care what preschool you attend. That's the kind of next step that we're looking at. And when we would want to continue to fund that in FY21.
Thank you, Marcy. Sobering, to say the least. Peter, I am going to turn it over to you. I think everybody knows Peter is from Charlotte.
Yeah,
so Peter.
Originally from Memphis. I'm a Memphian, but yes, I live in Charlotte. Hey, everybody. I want to start by thanking Marcy and Amy and Deanne for the call last Friday. I was fairly aware of what was coming our way, but the learning that I took away from that call, you'll see influenced here, especially Marcy, the piece about second stream. So Kol HaKavod for being ahead of that. Anybody think that the bomb threats look like a cakewalk now? There's a role for humor. Maybe that falls on deaf ears right now, but like, holy shit. Just a couple level setting pieces. So we are calendar year, fiscal year, governance year aligned. So we're January 1 to December 31. And we have run 3 different scenarios. One is June 1, one is September 1, and one is January 1 as a resumption of our normal business operations. We are, after passage of 2 board resolutions tonight at an emergency board meeting, we'll be announcing to our community that we're extending our suspension of programs, services, and facility access. That's the phrase that we're using, a suspension of program and facility access through May 10th. We are sticking to the guidelines of CDC and the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services so that I have any leg to stand on. If I start varying from those timelines, I feel like I'm fucked. And so that's what I'm sticking to, albeit I know we are not opening on May 11th. There is no scenario. I've studied, albeit in my infinite amount of time, the psychology of the pandemic and how governments ease their citizens into what we're in, and I can see it being employed by governments around the world and by the CDC right now. They all know there is absolutely no chance we are opening on May 11th right now. And they're just trying to ease people in so that total anarchy does not occur. Relative to facilities, so we are, I'll get back to employment in a second. Relative to facilities, we are on a community campus. It's a 54-acre campus. 14 different Jewish institutions operate from the campus. When your laughter subsides, you will understand what I'm up against there. We were one of, although not the leading, but one of 2 institutions that took the bold leadership decision to begin to close. It was us and the Reform Synagogue. Tremendous admiration for Rabbi Knight, Rabbi Asher Knight. We are now operating the campus on a very limited basis, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. for only staff access, with only limited access to the facility maintenance for pools and tennis courts and things like that, so that they don't fall into disrepair on Saturday, Sunday. Our security team has taken over the campus. All exits and entrances, with the exception of one, are closed. There is one entrance to the facility. When you walk in the facility, at every door where you would have to grab a door handle, outside of the door is a station for wipes. You grab the wipe, you open the door. As soon as you come through the one door, the security desk is positioned 6.5 feet away from you. He says, stop. You are asked a series of protocol questions. If you cannot follow can you get them to stop there? If you cannot follow the protocol questions or successfully pass them, you do not get in. You get turned around. Before you even get to the protocol questions, you have to be on an approved list. And we've quarantined people who we know can't pass the questions anyway. So that is basically the way that the facility is functioning right now. We had several capital projects that were already underway or that we had signed contracts for. We're allowing those to continue as long as the workers can pass the protocols. Employment. I look at our staff as what I call our family of staff. And right now it's all inclusive. I'm not drawing distinctions, whether you are salaried or hourly, whether you are a third-party contractor or an independent contractor, whether you work 1 hour a week or 40 hours a week, whether you're exempt nor non-exempt, whether you've been with us 1 day or 800 years. You are our family of staff. And when I am applying things right now, they are applied evenly. That is because we are going to need to turn the switch back on as soon as we possibly can. And many of our revenue streams and many of our highest margin products are conducted and delivered by our independent contractors. God willing, anyone in this country has any disposable revenue to do something like swimming lessons for your kids or personal training, I need to flip that switch. I need to turn it back on. Our after school program is delivered by hourly employees who only work less than 15 to, or so hours a week. If I fuck them right now, they will not be there for me when I need to turn that switch back on. So in some cases, the salaried exempt employees may lose their jobs before those other people if it gets to that. Okay? Scenario one, and you're gonna hate me, and I was advised by a trusted colleague not to say this, okay? But after passage of our board tonight, we have committed to full compensation for every member of our family of staff through May 31. The LJCC is heavily dependent upon summer program and membership revenue. I'm reading from a statement that'll go out tonight after the board meeting. The board and senior leadership recognize and acknowledge that should the LJCC not be in a position to resume operations as of June 1st, 2020, the need for substantial job program elimination and workforce reduction would be required and likely sustained through at minimum 2020 in order to preserve the solvency of the LJCC. Stark, but you got to face it, right? Okay, seeking revenue, layoffs, furloughs, terminations, right? We're like Marcy said, trying to figure out like, how do we keep our people whole in the best way possible? I'm looking at like, taking an entire department and saying, we are no longer offering athletics, done, right? Rather than trying to furlough or lay off or everybody takes a 20% pay cut, all that does is create a bleed of the inevitable rather than to just say like, boom, we're no longer doing this, we're leaner, we're meaner, this is where we're going, where are my highest value revenue programs, where are my margins, what is the things that I have to deliver. Seeking revenue, yeah, we've created a staff sustainability fund. We're basically saying to people, please continue to pay your membership. Every single one of those dollars is gonna sustain our staff. I'm not even talking about facilities. Every single dollar is going to sustain our staff at this point, because like Marcy said, I'll never get contributions that'll eclipse what that amount is. Take it as a tax deduction, because just like Marcy said, we are going to begin delivering content, we think, on Monday, and we're going to deliver it to everybody. I don't care if you're a member or not. It's for the entire community. Thereby, the membership revenue that we're taking in is fully tax deductible, because we're providing the content for free, so there's no member value equation there. I may get caught by the tax man. I'll take that when it comes. Of course, I've reached out to our biggest donors. We'll see. Who knows? I'm not counting on that. Normal considerations. That's really funny. Normal considerations, deliberations process. Gabe, will you go to the team sheet, please? Click on Teams. Yeah. So this is Marcy's work, and again, I had to teach 6th grade social studies the other day about Genghis Khan. So like, if you disclose this information to anybody, I will wreak a wrath on you like he used to for his people. Okay. So this is confidential information with the exact names. This is the way I looked at it. The x-axis, right, is the different teams: business continuity, second stream, member facing, employee facing, innovation, utility. Down the y-axis, you've got all the different departments. I looked at it and tried to see, how do I get business continuity for when people start getting sick, so that I don't lose the entire department, as well as I looked at the building geographically and said, how do I get people into the building when they need the access, so that they're not within 6.5 feet of everybody or of anybody. And so that's how this is built. They all have access to the facility 1 day a week. They can request that access on other days, but I know on this 1 day of the week, if they have to have access, they won't come into 6 feet contact, because I have shared offices and things like that. I met with everybody on Tuesday. I set up the teams. Most people chose to meet virtually rather than come in, because the people in red are already quarantined. They cannot pass the protocol we have in place. They've either traveled, or they're sick, or they're in a high-risk population, or a family member's in a high-risk population. So we said, you cannot even come until you can pass the protocol. That protocol, that quarantine, is going to start to affect people who are sick, who get infected. So that's how we'll track it as we move forward. People are not expected to come into the building. I have not been into the building since Tuesday when we had the meetings. We have regular calls with my team of team leaders across the top, and I have regular calls with our campus, with all the executives on the campus. I encourage you to think about, how are you connecting with your staff? They need us as much as we need them. I'll leave it at that until questions. Oh, Gabe. Well, oh, sorry. Go back. Go back to the programs. We're looking at longitudinal programs. All right. So the red stuff is the stuff that's currently canceled. At the end of my board meeting tonight, everything on this page turns red. All right. Thanks, everybody. Hope that helped.
Peter, thank you. Thank you for sharing that document so openly. I know you had done that electronically at one point also. And I also want to thank you for, I'm amazed at sort of the way that everybody's leaning in and all the work that's being done. I'm also really impressed with the way that people are being so forthcoming and sharing even before, for instance, you went to your board tonight. So I want to thank you on behalf of everybody. I want to recognize for those on the call, and I'm grateful, Peter, and in great admiration, actually, for the way you talked about your family of staff and not making any distinction, and that you're in a financial position to be able to pay them through the end of May. I want to recognize that not everybody on this call is in a position to do that, and I know we've heard some sensitivities, right? And Peter, I know you're nodding. We've heard some sensitivities. I think all of us will do everything that we can. There's not one J that cares about their staff more than any other J, obviously. This is all about the position that we're in to do whatever we can at this moment. With that, Brian, I will turn it to you to share your reflections.
Thank you. And I so appreciate last week's call with Amy, Deanne, and Marcy joining again. I think she really gave us a sense of what we could expect, and it's been everything of that plus. And Peter, thank you for just incredible preparation. I think part of the message, and I don't want to, I guess, repeat what the other two colleagues have said, is I think there's no one answer. And I think this is ever evolving, and every day is a mile and a half. And I'm sure we're all going through, feeling like you're walking the cliff one moment and then getting inspired and figuring out the next piece. And I think this has all hit so quickly. It's also hit our lay leadership this quickly. It's hit our members this quickly, and everybody is scrambling. So when we think about our donor base, I reached out to a past president who had reached out to me for lunch the week before. Of course, we didn't have lunch this week, and he's just laying off. He's never done a layoff in 47 years. He's laying off two of his 4 factories are shutting down because he's in the linen supply business for both hospitals and healthcares and hospitality. The hospitality industry has gone to zero, and obviously the hospital industry will be healthy. So he's had to reduce pieces. So everybody's going through this, and I think that's both helpful from a sense that we can gain community through it, and also difficult because if you think about our revenue sources, almost 70-80% of our expenses are personnel related, and 70-80% of JCCs are funded on revenue. And it's like we were the airline and the hotel and the restaurant that all shut down at exactly the same time. All of us have gone through challenges in business units, one or another, at multiple times, but not everything closed all at the same time for an indefinite period of time. So I think we have to work our way through all of that. And maybe one day we'll get back to that white paper on talent that I had the pleasure to present back in January that now feels about 1 million miles away. From Pittsburgh's perspective, we had never been in a better financial position that we were in. Last Thursday, we made our last debt payment of debt that we had taken 25 years ago on March 2nd, celebrated that on March the 6th. And in a budget and finance committee meeting, and we spent about 10 minutes at my insistence, because nobody even thought it was that important, about bringing up what had come from Marcy and Paul in the Bay Area, piece around level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4 stage closure preparedness, that I felt it was important to tell them that the world could change. And I think people were like, yeah, if it changes, it changes. For those communities that had not had a corona spread or any corona cases, which are many, I think you probably experienced what we did, is we went from level 1 to 4 in 24 hours, closed shop the next day, and then began to sort of scramble for virtual pieces. So for those of you that have really been amazing on some of the online content, I'd say in Pittsburgh, we're about a quarter of a step, maybe a half a step behind all of that, figuring that out. I'm not sure what that means. I'm not sure we can monetize it, but I think we can certainly engage with it. So I think that will be helpful. And I do thank the Bay Area just for getting us to go through an exercise, because I think it helped our staff begin to understand what could be. It just happened so quickly with such a level of societal panic that I don't think anybody in any of our lifetimes had seen anything quite like this everywhere. So I think that's, the text of all of this. I came to the building on Monday, met with our staff with social distancing, because we'd already heard that for about an hour and a half. I have not been back. We have no more than 2 or 3 people in the building, so we don't have Peter's protocols, but we are doing some maintenance things. We are going to be quickly emptying our indoor pools and things like that, because we know this is an extended shutdown. This is Pennsylvania, so we're always like number 26 in the country on everything in Pennsylvania. We never are first, and we're never last, and we never lead, and we're never last. West Virginia is usually last, so next door. So which is where our overnight camp is, that I doubt we'll get to this summer. So right now, our governor has closed schools and declared an emergency through March 30th. That's only as far as we're going, and we know it's going to be much further. So we know that that's going to happen after. And I think we're like many other JCCs, going from our best financial position ever to an existential threat of our sustainability in a week. And then trying to work and patch us all together with 2 kids at home and no school and all these other things that many of you are also facing at the same time, and remote for an agency that's built on human contact. Let me just give you a few things that I've learned from these calls. and where I think these calls are still helpful. We're going through a number of different scenarios around our employees, and I'm actually taking to heart some of the ways that you're dealing with this. In our scenario, I don't see the ability for us to begin to continue to pay our part-time, non-full-time staff after the end of the month, which is what we've committed to, which will get them a partial check into April based on our payroll period. And that's 400 employees, some of which have been with us for a long period of time. And I think we have to just deal with it as a class of employees because we're not shutting things, nothing's operating pretty much, with the exception of the conflicting guidance we got around senior meals. If those of you are senior meal providers, where the county shut us down and then the state said you're mandated to do it. It took them 3 days to figure it out. And on Monday, we'll be able to restart that with some limited staff, and we will get limited income. If that went perfectly for a year, that's $300,000 of our $25 million operating budget. So, that will keep some people employed. It's only if we drop and go and they walk through a circle and everything. So we're going to do our best around that, and do some social service work, which I think is important from a visibility and a presence standpoint. And we're looking at different scenarios that we heard on these calls. I didn't know what the WARN Act was until yesterday. So for those of you that were on the HR call, we investigated that. We believe that we'd be an exemption. I think all JCs would be an exemption because of the national emergency we're in. And we'll, just like Peter said, we'll take our chances if somebody filed a claim. There is no state WARN Act in Pennsylvania because we're number 26 out of 50 and everything. I'm sure California is number 1. And what we're now doing is really seeing unit by unit, who do we need that's critical? How do we need them critical? Are we going to turn our full-time staff, all of them, into non-exempt employees so we limit their hours but maintain their health care and other benefits for this? Our scenario at this point, and it's a working scenario, is around a September 1st scenario with no camp, including our resident camp. And obviously the pain points for that will be huge. So we're sort of playing that, but many of our staff, whether they work at camp or not, might be incredibly inexpendable as we move forward around all of that. So we'll have to see. We're worried about early childhood, where it's been very, very difficult to get workers, but it might not be quite as difficult 3 or 6 months from now. But will they have the qualifications to work in a licensed childcare facility? And are we going to take that risk either? Those are the things that we're trying to think about. We're trying to be measured, but we're also having a race against time. If you have no income coming in, if your donors are having their own financial challenges, and we've never been a big donor community in that kind of regard, we've sort of grounded out on the ground, and your payroll rack is over $1 million a month, you don't have a lot of time. We didn't have a line of credit. We were just beginning some capital projects. We have to repurpose some dollars, et cetera, to sort of get us through what I think, at least at a minimum, is a 5 to 6 month swing, and can certainly go longer. There are a few things that we are doing that we're proud of, because I think that this is an opportunity. If life has turned itself on its axis, here's a couple of things that we're thinking about. One is we reached out because we did a number of blood. We always do a lot of blood drives, but we specifically did several during 1027 for our 1-year commemoration of the Tree of Life shooting. And they're very interested. They've had 2,500 cancellations in the past week. There's going to be a desperate need for blood. And we were talking about turning over parts of our facilities over to them with obviously indemnification and waivers and all of those types of pieces that they'd have to disinfect and clean. But we have empty buildings right now. And if we can begin serving community in a different way. We did begin today reaching out to our main hospital system about overflow needs and things like that. And Marcy had talked a little bit about that. And I don't know whether we'd get compensated or not compensated or community service, but if we stay relevant in this community during this crisis, and when we're able to rebuild and return to services, we'll get there. Because our balance sheet is so good, because we had paid off our debt, we will work our way through that, but we'll go now back into long-term debt that will ultimately have to term out to get there. So I think this will stay with us for a significant period of time as we work our way through all of that. I think it's also very possible, as we're talking to our medical professionals, and particularly in our main branch, we are filled with meds and eds. We're right on the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, which is a megalopolis, and Carnegie Mellon. We're right adjacent to the universities, and they really believe that that there's going to be a staged recovery, because if we're going to be living with this for 18 months in one form or another, society can't close for 18 months and stay a society. So we're going to begin doing what India is doing. And basically, they probably have millions of coronavirus cases, but life goes on as normal, and they deal with things as they deal with things. And we may move into a slightly different way society-wise once we figure this out, and different treatments. And I liked your spreadsheet, Peter. That was helpful. So I could see us opening things. We are going to investigate. We just got some advice from the state that we can open up childcare for emergency and physicians and things like that. Do we want to do that? Do we want to take that risk? Is it worth it, et cetera? I think we can't leave any stones unturned right now. I think if we're going to maintain a commitment to our workforce and doing what we're doing, we have to look at everything and then assess the viability of all of that. If we get too risk crazy, we'll be closed for good. If we're too brazen, then we'll be closed for good. And we'll have to see where this all heads in the middle. I think the last thing that I would say is that I'm still sitting on a daily basis with the association, sort of trying to be a bit of a bridge to the field, and have been trying to sort of present some of these sobering realities, different ideas for content, watching the reaction to all of that, listening to that listserv. And I think for me, at least, it's been helpful because even as I apply what I'm doing on a national level to our community, which is my primary and deep responsibility and where I live, and certainly can't get out of right now. There's every single call I'm taking 1, 2, 3 different ideas and moving it down the chain. And I hope all of you are as well. I hope that's helpful.
Brian, incredibly helpful. You actually, you shared what I was going to share. I just want to make sure that all of your colleagues on here know the dual role that you've continued to play through all of this. Obviously, it's not the role that Brian initially thought he was taking on in his work with JCC Association, but as part of our early morning leadership meeting, Brian is continuing to provide a sobering reality from the field. Obviously, we're all hearing it on these calls too, but it's an incredibly important role. I know there are several questions that are coming in, and I'm going to turn it to Sue. I want to acknowledge that we will want to get to as many questions as we can. So if you're able, we're okay, perhaps staying on a couple minutes after, but I want to be respectful of time. So I'm going to turn it quickly to Sue to see how many questions we can get to.
Thanks, Jen. Most of the questions are specific to one person, so that might make it go a little quicker. And I also appreciate a number of people have offered to also share their experiences. In deference to time, we probably won't go that route, but we do acknowledge that there's 105 lines active, or 100 and whatever. That means there's 105 scenarios, and everyone is in the midst of this. So with all due respect to Marcy, Brian, and Peter, we're not presenting them as the only examples or the best examples. They are 3 different examples. And I want to just respect everyone else's process as quite valuable as well. Marcy, can you comment? I understand you have a union shop, and I know union has come up on other calls. If you could comment how that's being handled.
Yeah, so we are a complete union shop, SEIU local. So far, we have not gotten our particular union rep is on his way out on retirement and has been a good partner over many, many years. But I will say that the national unions are becoming more aggressive in with regard to the way they are interacting with employers, and as we think about trying to reopen preschool in any way, shape, or form to other providers, it's a real challenge as to whether the labor piece is going to get in the way. It's been one of the issues. While San Francisco has been very, very far forward on caring for its school children. One of the reasons why they're not able to reopen schools for K-12 for healthcare providers is around difficulties with labor. So,
thanks, Marcy. I'm actually going to stay with you for another minute. You had referenced earlier that you're not offering refunds. If you can clarify, was that specifically about March membership? Or was that all programs that have already occurred, and also nursery school for the balance of the year? Or are
So
there
that was
some
all-
refunds being issued?
Sure. So that was all March billing went forward with a note, customized note for regarding which area of activity. Along with many of my Bay Area colleagues, we will be asking folks to opt in to billing for March, but we are not going to, if we send out a billing for March having been closed and being closed for an indefinite period of time, we'll have 5,000 phone calls, and we're not prepared to deal with that, and we don't want to anger people, and people do want to do, and we've gotten very little pushback. We have 2 more billings for part of our preschool system. What the March billing was the final billing for many. And then the other question is the camp deposits, which we currently have, which we will need to make decisions about by May 7th.
Thank you. Peter, you had talked about funding or paying through the end of May. If you're comfortable sharing, can you share with others how you're resourcing that?
We've been an extremely successful and extremely disciplined business for the better part of a decade. And we would be depleting our cash.
Okay. So this is cash on hand is what you're saying. These are not new funds that were found.
No.
Okay.
I've done the run rates on cash on hand. The scenarios are near zero revenue. We've received a promise from our federation that our allocation is fully intact for 2020. We have received notice from United Way that we can fully unrestrict our funds, albeit that's $15,000, but I'll take it and move it to operations. And I've got a 10% of our membership units projection of the staff sustainability fund, meaning I'm going to give you my membership dues, and then that's for April and May. And then at that point, it begins to reduce by 50% for every month thereafter until by December, I'm at like $6,000 coming in on that line.
Thanks, Peter. Brian, you spoke about starting layoffs in the near future. This obviously won't pertain to Peter, but either Brian or Marcy, if you could comment as you're looking at these layoffs, terminations, furloughs, how are you factoring in paid time off, sick leave, those sorts of things into your thinking and in decision making?
So we haven't made any final decisions yet. This is just what we're thinking about. I don't want to create the rumor mill. Right now, if we're dealing with our part-time workforce, they are scheduled hourly. So they don't receive in the Commonwealth paid time off or things like that. There was actually just a paid time off bill that is actually approved in Pittsburgh. It didn't become effective until March 15th this year. So so basically what we're going to say is we're not terminating you. You didn't do anything wrong. We just can't schedule you until we resume operations. And as our departments move, as we, if we have different kinds of staged openings, we will bring you back, and you're the first people we'll bring back as we do that. And my guess is we'll do that with our labor attorney and things like that in non-discriminatory fashion. So that's that piece. We have not made any decisions yet around full-time benefited employees. We're looking at a couple of models, and some really came even yesterday out of yesterday's call that Andy Eisenberg led. Do you move some folks from exempt to non-exempt but maintain their health benefits for a number of months? If we moved into a layoff, then there's really no legal difference between that and a termination, but you would bring them back, but you have to provide 2 weeks notice and up to 4 weeks of severance. And we're beginning some cost calculations. In that regard, I'm looking at Peter because I believe there may be a scenario where it may wind up in the short term that it might be better for the employees, depending on how many people take our healthcare insurance, to keep them with our healthcare insurance than to terminate them. And then even if we're reducing their salaries dramatically and making them hourly employees at a low rate for 40 hours a week to maintain that benefit, if we believe we're going to reopen on September 1st, we've then preserved them maintaining healthcare for themselves and their families. And given the fact that we're in a health crisis, that may be a more humane way to do that. If we can't go that direction, we have to pay our healthcare a month in advance. I'm sure all of you do that. We would not make that effective until the beginning of April, so that they would not have to be scrambling for healthcare on that day. For our part-time employees, they do not receive healthcare benefits. So in that regard, we know we have to make some drastic changes quickly. We did have, pretty good cash on hand, but not maybe at the level of Peter, and we saved a lot of that for capital. And until we can access a line of credit and things like that, but that's what we're investigating right now. And because this has been a fluid situation, we're trying not to be rushed. I think I said this before in another call. Joel Dinkin has been an incredible guide for me. I did happen to spend some time. For those of you that might have remembered this on another call, he lost his father, who was a Pittsburgher, who was the executive director of Tree of Life and worked for our JCC for 15 years. He had to have a private funeral, no Shiva, which is just a horrible way. But we did take a social distanced walk on Tuesday, and he just provided some guidance on sort of staying measured. It's, he lived through it with the hurricanes, and just try to buy a little bit of time so that you're not so reactive but responsive. And we know people want answers today, but we can't always provide them with those answers, and we can't necessarily take away their angst. Hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Brian.
Brian, just you're spot on there. What we're really thinking about is what's the best scenario for each employee, and while we're to keep them whole through May 31, there are going to be realities of people that are going to be better off if I terminate them. We will accommodate that. I've made that very clear, that we will not force you to reduce your hours, but if you ask for a reduction of hours, we will facilitate that post haste. We've already had that, right? Think about all these employees that have cobbled together a living in multiple places, and their other employees are not treating them the same way that we are. And they're saying, like, I gotta get on unemployment. Please, like, can you terminate me? And we're like, yep, done. We've got other employees who, for the time being, are saying, hey, I'm a second earner. I don't really need this income. I'm going to donate my salary to the staff sustainability fund. And I'm like, great, we'll take that. And you can change your mind, at a later date for the time period that I promised you.
I do have one other thought, because you can apply for unemployment for your reduction of your compensation. So we're beginning to factor in if we reduce compensation and they received a full benefit based on their salary. So we're just investigating that model. I think we're going to have a lot more clarity by the end of the weekend, maybe tomorrow.
Thanks.
Yeah, we're trying to run that. We're trying to run that too.
So I want to try to pivot for a few minutes, and I know we're going to go after the top of the hour. I want to pivot to some of your thinking for the after. Before we get to the top, those JCCs that are in partnership with Exos, Michael Waldman from the St. Paul JCC is organizing a call for you all to connect with one another. If you are a client or a partner with Exos, if you could be in touch with Michael Waldman at mwaldman at stpauljcc.org. Thank you. So for all three of you, I'll ask the same question, and Brian, you're the one that brought it up. You're modeling this out as if no camp. The chat room went crazy for most I don't want to say most, for many JCCs that could be the end of their existence, certainly devastating financially. So as you model these out, how are you factoring in the summer camp, and how are you modeling an after, clearly a new business model, and what thoughts are going into that?
We're absolutely not there yet. I think we just had to face a sober reality. I mean, I made the assumption once Kansas closed schools for the rest of the school year, 50 other states will follow. We'll do it, 26 of 50. And therefore, either people are going to be going to summer school and there'll be no camp, or people won't feel like their communities are healthy enough to either send their children away, or you don't have healthy enough staff, or you'll be concerned about outbreaks. Look, if we are able to have any kind of camp, that would be plus at this point, but I don't want to bet on it.
Marcy or Peter? Wait, Marcy, wait, hold on. Marcy, you're muted. Hold on. Let me.
I would say that we're in much the same place, and I commented in the chat bar. It's not to say we're in a great financial position. We obviously have a tremendous cost savings by not delivering camp, but camp is our highest margin product as well, and it is Nearly a third of my programmatic revenue, half of our revenue is membership revenue, the other half is program, and then of that half of program, over a third of it is camp. So as camp goes, so goes my entire agency. We would be extremely hobbled at that point. That's why I'm talking about slash and burn and getting leaner and meaner as to who we are as an organization. And if we came out of September with an ability to reopen, anything puts us to insolvency.
Marcy?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add that I'm where Brian is. That's next week's plan. I'll just say that as we run a summer camp in an office building, essentially. We have a day camp, no after school camp. So we're really beginning to pivot everything to what can we do outside. But that's a late March, probably into April conversation.
Thank you. There are a few other questions. Actually, I'm going to go one more question. A few of you talked about prioritizing even the remote programming or the programming that you're offering now, or finding revenue in remote programming. If you could talk about any of the things that you feel like you might have some success in the short term, in this interim period of closure, for revenue streams from programming.
So I'm not, I come from the tech world, not from in my original life, and we're all about aggregating eyeballs and figuring out how we monetize that later. Look, I think in this atmosphere, I really want to lean into the idea that we are a service provider. If we get the goodwill of the people who are consuming our content, who are appreciative of what we're doing, then we will look to that in the summertime. But we are not at all thinking about any kind of paywall for anything that we do in the next 2 months.
Thanks. Peter or Brian, anything different? No. Okay.
I would just say that we have always been an institution that tries to create as much value for your membership as we possibly can. We do a tremendous amount of program offerings for our membership that are quote unquote free, just trying to add membership value. So that's really where our focus is right now. How do we create membership value in this virtual environment so that you just keep paying your membership, realizing that in 72 hours, 1 in 5 Americans, if not more, are going to be out of work. We're talking, guys, the Great Depression was a 25% unemployment rate. They're openly talking about 20% unemployment rate right now. So we're talking, Hooverville and soup lines. And so they may want to contribute to us, but they're just not going to have the ability. And so, we'll go to your, house or train you, personal train you from 6.5 feet away with body weight exercises in your driveway. I'm not going into your house, or we'll deliver that stuff via Zoom. But that's pittance, guys. That's not going to be a revenue stream.
Great. So I want to end on something that's slightly more positive. I'm going to go back to Marcy with one question. You mentioned your resilience fund. How are you?
I got a positive one to end too. Okay.
Well, how are you, Marcy? How are you allocating those dollars? How are you using them, and how's that being communicated with those contributing to it?
It's all about staff, and it's all about keeping us whole in order to be able to provide services now and into the future. We've been in business for almost 150 years, and we're intending on being in business, for another. So I'm not getting that kind of detailed, that kind of, where is this going? Which program is this supporting? I'm not getting that kind of a response. I'm getting we've been partners with you and your agency for years and years and years. I'm going to figure out what I can do for you.
Thank you. All right, Peter, you got to bring it home happy.
All right, so I'm not going to say I was ahead of the curve. I definitely wasn't. I was maybe slightly ahead of the curve seeing this stuff coming down the line. And so a little over a week ago, I started to talk to our staff about our senior program. We run a senior daycare center, basically, for people who are isolated in their homes. We have a fleet of buses. We go out, we pick them up, we bring them to the J. They have a full day of programming, and we feed them, we exercise their mind, we exercise their bodies, and then we send them home. And so when the CDC started to talk about high-risk populations, I started to wrap our senior team around the fact that that we were going to end that really, really quickly and in person. And so on Friday, we had them come in, and I met with them, and I was only talking about suspending our Oasis program at the time. I knew full well that in a matter of hours, we were going to close the entire center. I had already called the staff meetings and already had the messaging ready. And I brought them together and I said, you know, you're a family and we're doing this, because we have a duty to protect you. But we also know that you are food insecure and you're dependent upon us to feed you 3 times a week. So we've already mobilized a caterer who is going to prepare for you 14 days of food for, if not 28, for the coming national lockdown. I'm surprised we're not there already, guys, where not martial law, but shelter in place as a nation. I think we'll be there in hours. And so we saw that coming, or I saw that coming, and said, we're gonna deliver to you, you know, a full rotisserie chicken, a plate of lasagna, a quiche, this or that or the other, some activities in a bag to do. We started mobilizing that. We told them we would deliver that on Tuesday. The food was prepared on Monday before we shut the kitchen down, sanitizing. We packed it all up on Tuesday, and on Wednesday, one day later than I promised, on Wednesday, we delivered meals to every single one of our seniors. That will last them a month. Secondly, sorry, give me a minute. We've been supporting underprivileged kids every summer through a program that's called the Freedom School. We have a Freedom School campus. About 100 kids come from public schools around Charlotte. We prepare all year long to feed them with food donations. We've been storing that food for delivery in the summer. These are kids who, when they don't go to school in the summer, right, they don't get fed for breakfast and lunch. So we've been preparing them, mobilized. And we delivered food on Wednesday to all of those kids. We are the same values-based organization today as we were last Thursday before we suspended all services and facilities. We will get through this because of being the same values-based institution we are. I'm not the best Hebrew speaker, but there's 2 things that that have really, really resonated with me, right? The Hillel quote, right? You know, if I'm only for myself, if I'm not for others, if not now, when? And another one that you know, somebody will be better at the Hebrew. I've got it in a couple emails. There's an expression in our tradition that says, we all live through that together. I look forward to saying that with you all. We will live through this together.
Wow. Peter, Marcy, and Brian, on behalf of all of us on this call and the entire field, I want to express our collective thanks for the openness, the honesty, the guidance. It is clear that, and I've said this on calls before, these calls have very much been about the brass tacks, the finances. We're trying to convene and get the information out to all of you that we know you desperately want, but we certainly recognize, as you all do, that these are not decisions that are only made with the finance half of our brain. Our hearts are as involved, and Peter, you are, your expression in the last couple of minutes, I think, is kind of where we all are. I know we're all at that edge. I want to thank the 3 of you. I want to thank everybody again for joining us. This was recorded. You can let your colleagues know if they wanted to know. We were obviously recording it straight through the end, and we will make this available as we have with the rest. I'm sorry to go back to a mundane topic for a moment, but the survey, I did get notification from Gabe that the survey did go out if there were questions about that. So please, if you don't see it in your inbox, please check your spam or junk folder. to see if it went there. If you're still having trouble, please email Gabe. Sorry, Gabe. Please email Gabe and we'll make sure to get the survey directly to you. Once again, my heartfelt thanks to the three who presented, to everybody who listened. We wish you the best in the days ahead. For the knowing that we're sort of in uncharted territory here, it's amazing. You're all leading with very steady hands at the wheel, and for that we are most grateful. Have a good afternoon.